A man who has never lost his credibility, Mark Halperin, editor-in-chief of 2A, host of Next Up on the Megyn Kelly Network, and one of the reasons I got into political reporting. Mark, good to see you as always. Is this a political story or a media story?
As my son would say, bruh, loved your intro.
Thank you.
Perfect pitch on what's going on. It's both. The irony of this book is they purport to lay bare the cover-up. They don't. They don't say what the cover-up consisted of. They don't say who was involved. And so I find it curious that they're selling it as the exposure of the cover-up. There continues to be accountability. That's one piece, part of the political and historical question is who actually engaged in this cover-up. Second is the question of how the Democratic Party is going to be accountable for what they did, because it led in a linear fashion to the election of Donald Trump. The media story, I think, is in some ways a bigger story because I continue to say it's the biggest media scandal in American history. And to this moment, as you well laid out, there's no accountability about what happened. One of the authors of that book was one of the few reporters who was aggressive about the story. The other reporter, up until this morning, through his publisher, was saying, I covered the story as hard as I could, but the cover-up was so intense I couldn't get to the bottom of it. Today, he apologized, basically, and said he should have done better. And I think the reason that he changed his story is because the record speaks for itself. He and his network, particularly Brian Stelter, who you showed, just simply accepted the Democratic spin, were behind the scenes often intimidated by the Biden White House. And I will say to people who ask the question, why is NewsNation talking about Joe Biden when Donald Trump is accepting a plane from the Qataris, when Don Jr. and Eric are doing business? Part of the answer is, if you want, as the media or as Democrats, to have credibility with the American people to critique and investigate Donald Trump, you need to come clean about a 4-year campaign to hide the truth from the American people that the media was every bit as involved in as the Biden White House was.
So far, it appears as though there is no desire to come clean. And Alex Thompson actually was on this network a lot, on my show a lot, talking about Joe Biden's health issues that he was reporting on, caught an awful lot of flack for doing it. And he was very easy to book because no one else was interested in the story. So I think you have to separate, I think you rightly do, Alex Thompson and Jake Tapper in this case. There are all these moments of you say exposing the cover-up. They're not really exposing the cover-up, at least that we know of so far. They're exposing these moments allegedly showing Joe Biden infirmed or out of it. And you had somebody who was in the room for the George Clooney Joe Biden get-together where allegedly Biden didn't recognize George Clooney. Here it is from 2A. Take a listen.
Rufus, were you at the famous George Clooney fundraiser?
I was, and I was one of the 8 people in the room when this infamous moment happened.
So do you think it's in the room? Do you think it's true that he didn't recognize George Clooney?
No, is the answer to the question.
Okay, so is there perhaps a situation where there is a lot of people who are now trying to jump on the bandwagon of Joe Biden was infirmed to what? Get on the right side of history?
Yeah. There's a congresswoman from New Hampshire, former congressman, quoted in the book saying she was at that fundraiser too, and Biden was so horrible that she said, well, that's it. We're done. He can't win. I'm paraphrasing. And then the day of the debate, she went on Twitter and said Biden won the debate. So the party has this problem, and I don't know why it's so hard for them to acknowledge, but it's a piece with the media. People don't want to accept that they stood by. And I had a guy on 2A on tonight who is a liberal Democrat. He says he's to the left of AOC. And he agreed with me. When we watched the debate, we weren't the least bit surprised at Joe Biden's performance, not because we have inside sources necessarily, but because we have a subscription to C-SPAN. All of the things that Joe Biden exhibited in the debate, he didn't exhibit every time he was in public. His State of the Union address that same year was quite good. But like a lot of people with acuity decline, he had good days and bad days. But the bad day of the debate, again, was of a piece with many other times. So to me, this is like through the looking glass and what Jake Tapper found there. It's so obvious what happened. I saw Biden's acuity decline in 2017. And anyone who says they didn't see it or they were surprised when it showed up, is simply ignoring what we saw in those videos that CNN wanted to call fake. They weren't fake. This is why 70 to 80% of the American people said Joe Biden shouldn't be the nominee, because they saw it with their own eyes. And the only people, besides the Biden White House, who wanted to deny what everyone could see were people in the press intimidated by the White House and not wanting to be accused of helping Donald Trump win the election.
Yeah, all true. It is confounding to me for somebody who was disgraced in the way that Joe Biden has been, and ill-served, I think, by his wife, by his advisors, and by so many. Whatever you think of Joe Biden, what's happening now is just kind of sad. Yeah. Pete Buttigieg, his Secretary of Transportation, now likely running for president, out in Iowa talking about Joe Biden. Here we go.
Would the party have been better off if he had just not run for re-election?
Maybe, and right now, with the benefit of hindsight, I think most people would agree that that's the case. We're also not in a position to wallow in hindsight.
What power does Joe Biden have that it is so hard to say, I was wrong, I am sorry? And I think it's the problem for both Democrats and the media, almost the same problem. For Democrats, it's worse because the media now is throwing Democrats under the bus, and Tapper among them, to save himself.
Well, I think it's worse for the media because although it's horrible that the Democrats lied.
That's what politicians do. Yeah.
And that's kind of their job, right? They're Democrats, and they have an incumbent president. The media, and the reason I say it's the biggest scandal in American media history, the media's job is to expose such things. So they engaged in professional malpractice. And I'll say, even though I keep urging the press and the Democrats to be honest, to restore their credibility so they can scrutinize Donald Trump with credibility, it's a hard thing to admit. It's a hard thing to say, we failed. Well, but I want some big newspaper editor to say, we're going to bring in an outsider with credentials and have them write a full report that we will make public about why our news organization failed to cover what should have been treated, and had it been Donald Trump, would have been treated as a constitutional crisis.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.